Peanut butter and noodles, what could be better? Today I'm going to show you how I make an easy and satisfying udon noodle recipe with a peanut sauce. To make this really quick, you can just use noodles from the store, whether that's a dried noodle. There are plenty of good options for dried noodles, or you can sometimes find fresh udon noodles in the refrigerated section of your local Asian market. Those are really delicious, and you can put this together really quickly. But of course I have time, so I'm making my own noodles. Now, I'm certainly not an udon noodle master, but I think I can show you how to make a pretty decent noodle at home that is chewy and delicious and would work well with this peanut sauce recipe. Traditionally, udon noodles are made with a very dry dough, about 30% hydration. This helps create that thick, chewy texture that you find in Asian udon noodles. The noodle recipe I'm going to show you today also is a little bit on the drier side, but I don't go quite that dry. I actually opt for about a 50% hydration noodle, which is sort of that fine line between getting the nice chewy texture and making a dough that's easy to work with at home. For the recipe today, I'm starting with 400 grams of flour. All-purpose flour will work just fine with this, but if you have a stronger bread flour with a higher gluten content, even better. I'm using bread flour today. Add that to a large bowl. Next, we want to prepare our saltwater solution, so add 8 grams of salt to 200 milliliters of water. Stir it until all of the salt is dissolved. You want to mix that salt water with your hands into the flour a little bit at a time. What we want to do is hydrate the flour particles as evenly as possible. If you add the water all at once, it doesn't mix in as evenly into the flour. Knead this all together until it pulls together into a rough dough. Again, it will be a little bit dry. If you think it is too dry, go ahead and add another little splash of water until you think it's about right. The exact amount of water your flour needs will depend a lot on the humidity. So every time you make this, it might take a little bit more or a little bit less water to get to the right consistency. Knead this dough on your board or countertop for about 5 minutes until the dough starts to become smooth. One of the important aspects of working with a lower hydration dough is that we need to do a series of stretching, folding, and resting to get that dough to be as smooth and homogeneous as possible. This will create a smooth dough that is strong enough to provide that chewy bite in the noodle. So take your dough after kneading it for a few minutes and place it inside of a large Ziploc bag to rest. I like to let my dough rest initially for about 30 minutes. An hour is better if you have the time. This allows the gluten to relax and to let the water fully hydrate all of the flour particles in the dough. After it is rested, take the dough out and flatten it by pressing down with your weight on a rolling pin. You can see that I'm slowly moving down the dough, pressing straight down every time. Once you've started to flatten it, roll it out some. You want to try to roll it out as much as you can until the dough starts to fight you. Then you want to fold the dough. I like to fold it into thirds. We are trying to eventually make a rectangle shape with the dough. Notice that the dough is not sticky. If it is sticky at all, you have too much water. It may help if you dust it with a little bit of flour in that case. Roll it out again and fold it up. You will find that the dough is getting stiff as the gluten tightens up every time you fold it. Rolling will become more difficult. I find I can get maybe 3 rolls and folds the first time after resting, but then after that I just can't get it to flatten out. If you try to press the dough, it just springs right back. That means you need to let it rest. So at this point, place the dough back into the bag and rest it again for about 15 to 30 minutes. Repeat this process of rolling and folding the dough as much as you can. Finally, let it rest again for about 15 to 30 minutes before rolling it flat into a sheet. In total, I try to get the dough to be folded at least 5 or 6 times with enough restings in between to be able to do that. This process takes a little bit of time, but it produces a dough that is super smooth and very strong. Now we're ready to roll it out to make our noodles. For this step, you want to use some cornstarch on your board. This prevents any sticking at all and makes the dough even more smooth. You could use flour, but I would really recommend cornstarch. It just has a different texture. Roll out your dough into a large rectangle until it is about 1/8 of an inch thick. This is going to take some time because it's still a stiff, dry dough. Keep rolling it in one direction and then turn it and roll it in the other direction. If you need more cornstarch as you go along, go ahead and sprinkle a little more on. Keep on working it and take your time as the dough slowly stretches out. Once your dough becomes thin enough, you can use the technique of rolling the dough around your rolling pin. Using your hands, gently press down and outward along the rolling pin. This helps to stretch the dough in both directions. Roll the pin forward a little bit at a time, using your hands again to push downward and outward gently on the dough. Once you get to the end of the board, pull the whole thing back and keep doing this a few times. After doing this for a few rolls, unroll the dough and then roll it up in the other direction. The dough should not stick to itself when you do this. If it does start to stick, add a little bit more cornstarch to it. Keep working it this way, rolling, gently stretching, until you have a large rectangle of dough at your desired thickness. It'll take a while, but the results will be so worth it. I'm rolling this to 1/8 of an inch, which is a little bit thinner than you might think for an udon noodle, but that's because when you go to cook those noodles, they tend to expand by about double when they cook in the water. When you're ready to cut your noodles, add a generous amount of cornstarch to the dough, fold it up lengthwise in sort of an accordion fashion, layering the dough back and forth. It's best to slightly offset the folds so that they don't press down and crease the noodles when you go to cut them. You want to use a sharp knife to slice the noodles, and you want to slice this in one quick motion. What you don't want to do is press down on the knife and crush the noodle. Let the blade do the work. Cut these as wide as you like. I like them about 1/4 inch wide, so it'll be slightly wider than it is thick. You want to separate these noodles to make sure that they're cut apart and make sure they don't stick together. In order to keep them from sticking, dust them with a little more cornstarch. I like to just take these and bundle them up into portion-sized bundles until I'm ready to cook them. If you want, you can freeze some of these for cooking later. Just place the bundles on a tray and freeze them, and once they're frozen, take them off the tray and pop them into a freezer bag for storage. Now let's talk about the sauce. This peanut sauce is simple and easy to make. Add 3 tablespoons of peanut butter to a bowl. You could use whatever kind of peanut butter you want. If it's smooth or crunchy, that's completely up to you. Both will work. I like my peanut sauce a little bit spicy, so I'm adding 1 tablespoon of gochukaru, which are the Korean red chili flakes. I find that they're not too spicy, but provide a really delicious flavor to my peanut sauce. We want a little bit of sweetness to balance the spice, so I'm adding 1 tablespoon of brown sugar. For the salt and umami, I'm adding 1 tablespoon of soy sauce. I like a little bit of sourness in mine, so I'm adding a tablespoon of Chinese black vinegar. And finally, that toasted sesame flavor really adds and enhances the peanut flavor, so I'm adding 1 teaspoon of toasted sesame oil. You want to thin this down with about 3 tablespoons of water and whisk this all together until it's all a homogeneous sauce. For the noodle dish, I'm also preparing some aromatics that I'm going to cook into the sauce. I have a good amount of chopped garlic and chopped ginger. And to beef up the noodle dish, I'm going to add some sliced mushrooms. Fresh udon noodles take longer to cook than other noodles because they are thicker. These will take about 12 to 15 minutes to cook. So get a big pot of water and heat it up to boiling. I like to add a pinch of salt to the water, but keep in mind that the udon noodles are pretty salty themselves, so you probably don't need too much salt in your water. Once the water boils, add your noodles to the pot, give them a good stir, and cook them for about 12 minutes. I usually start testing my noodles after about 10 minutes to see if they're cooked through but still have a bite to them. While the noodles are cooking, I'm going to cook my sauce. I'm heating up my flat-bottomed wok, and to this I'm adding a tablespoon or so of oil. In go my garlic and ginger, about 2 to 3 tablespoons of each. I'm giving them a quick sear in the oil, and then I'm adding in some mushrooms. You could leave out the mushrooms if you want, or if you want to add any other veggies or anything else to this, you certainly can. It's your noodle dish. A little pinch of salt goes in to help draw out the moisture from the mushrooms. Saute these until they are all softened through. Then I'm just adding in that peanut butter mixture that we made. It's a little bit thick, so I'm going to thin it down with a little bit of the water from the noodle cooking pot. I'm going to add this to my sauce bowl to try to rinse as much of that into the pot as possible, so I don't waste anything. It's still a little bit thicker than I want, so another ladle of noodle water goes in to help loosen up that sauce. You want your sauce to smoothly coat those noodles, not be like gloppy and thick on top of the noodles. Cook this just for a few minutes. If your noodles aren't quite ready yet, go ahead and turn off the heat to your sauce and cover it until they're done. When they are ready, turn the heat back up, add in your noodles, toss those gently in the sauce. If it's too thick, you can always add more of the noodle water to loosen it. Otherwise, these are ready. Green onions would be perfect to garnish this with, but I didn't have any on hand. I know, how is that possible? It happens. Finally, to add some freshness and crunch to this dish, I'm topping it with some finely julienne cucumbers and carrots, and I'm gonna garnish it with some fresh cilantro. And this was so good, you cannot believe it. It was slightly spicy, slightly sweet, slightly salty, and so creamy with that peanut butter. The noodles were soft but chewy, and they held up really well. Again, you can make this very quick if you use dried or store-bought fresh noodles, but making your own is so satisfying. I encourage you to try it. If you do try this recipe, please come back and tell me how it turned out for you. And I would really appreciate it if you could help me out by clicking that like button for the YouTube algorithm, and subscribe if you don't want to miss out on any more content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time when the pot thickens.